When I was just 13, my dad dropped me and my little sister off at my uncle's house. Before leaving, he said only one thing: if you don't bother him, you'll be fine. I believed him, and that was the biggest mistake of my life. In today's video, you'll hear one of the most heartbreaking and infuriating Reddit stories ever shared. A girl abandoned by her father, a twisted uncle, and an entire town that pretended nothing was happening. This is True Reddit Stories, where we uncover real accounts of drama, buried truths, and the survivors who found the strength to speak up. Chapter 1: The Fateful Sunday. I still remember that morning, clearly sunlight slanting through the curtains, and only 3 chairs around the table, one for me, one for my sister, and one empty. Dad was packing his suitcase hastily, ordering, "You two will stay with Uncle Gary. Just don't make him angry and you'll be fine." Then he turned and walked away, leaving us sisters behind as the door slammed shut. At first, Uncle Gary was as attentive as the perfect uncle you'd dream of. Every morning brought steaming, fragrant pancakes, and on weekend afternoons, he'd let us zoom around the yard in his patrol car lights, flashing red and blue. Juliet? My 8-year-old sister grinned ear to ear, convinced he was a superhero. I wanted to believe it too, except for the way he stared at me just a little too long, and the way he'd snap the gate shut behind me every time I stepped outside, making me feel like I was always being watched. Just 1 week later, the rules began. At school, we had to hand over our phones. We had to call him Sir instead of Uncle Gary. We weren't allowed to talk to the neighbors because they only caused trouble. Then one day, when I timidly asked, "Could you please call Dad for us?" I stumbled backward as his hand cracked against my cheek. The metallic taste of blood blossomed on my lips, and his voice turned icy. Disrespecting me with improper address is unacceptable. My sister burst into tears, and I forced myself to stay calm, realizing in that moment this house was no longer a safe haven, but a trap with a fragile guard ready to crush us at any moment. Chapter 2: Unspoken Rules and Secret Retributions. I still remember that first afternoon when Uncle Gary announced his new house rules. He told Juliet and me to hand over our phones so he could help us focus on our studies. We stood in silence, filing by to relinquish our devices, watching him lock them away in his cabinet. A suffocating sense of lost freedom welled up in my chest, and then he decreed that from now on we must address him as Sir, a lifeless title that stripped away every ounce of warmth from Uncle. Juliet gave a puzzled smile while I swallowed the bitterness burning in my throat. Whenever she slipped and called him Uncle Gary, his voice would low and menacing. Disrespect carries consequences. Before long, the first slaps arrived. I felt his hand across my cheek when I dared to ask about Dad. Juliet endured blows from his wooden attitude adjustment tool to her hand, all because she let out an involuntary sigh. He forced us to kneel on the cold tile, hands pressed against the floor, and recite over and over, "I will respect those in authority." When Juliet's wrist swelled purple, I no longer had the courage to slip a cold pack under her arm. Uncle Gary shoved me face first into the freezer's door, leaving me gasping for breath and sleepless all night. The physical pain felt like shackles, but it was the fear that truly crushed my heart every time I heard the lock click on my bedroom door. Every bruise we bore was hidden beneath long sleeves and pant legs, so as not to disturb the neighbors. Here, silence was not peace. It was a fragile armor concealing a nightmare that grew darker by the day. Chapter 3: Poker Night and the Screams for Salvation. That evening, I didn't dare sit next to Juliet. Uncle Gary had invited a group of fellow cops over for poker night. Their laughter and chatter echoed up to my room. Juliet carried a tray of drinks upstairs, her hands trembling, and I watched as a single drop of beer spilled onto his uniform. I saw his eyes darken instantly. Without a word of warning, he lunged and wrapped his hands around Juliet's neck, right there in the middle of the brightly lit living room. The clinking of poker chips and the gulping of beer fell silent. The only sound left was my sister choking, gasping, flailing for air. I froze for a moment, then my heart shattered. Something inside me snapped. I bolted for the door and sprinted into the yard, screaming, sobbing, calling for Mr. Lipton, the quiet old neighbor who had always watched us with gentle concern. "Help us! Please help Juliet!" I cried. He rushed out, hands trembling as he dialed emergency services. Just minutes later, the urgent wail of ambulance sirens pierced the night. Officers who weren't part of Uncle Gary's circle burst through the door, their red and blue lights flashing like a signal of rescue. They found Juliet, unconscious, red finger marks clearly visible on her neck, and no one bought his excuse that she tripped and fell. I stood to the side, tears streaming down my cheeks, feeling for the first time what it was like to be believed. That rescue scene didn't just break the nightmare for a moment, it cracked open the fragile door to something we hadn't dared hope for: protection. Chapter 4: The Photo and the Sentence I'll Never Forget. At the hospital, I sat by Juliet's bed all night. She breathed through an oxygen mask, her eyes shut tight, and her neck still bore the angry red marks, clear and cruel, like a declaration from someone who needed to control everything. When the doctor finally assured me that there was no serious internal damage, I stood up, took the phone the police had returned to me, and called Dad. I remember my hands shaking, the sweat pouring from my palms as I gripped the phone. The moment he picked up, I lost all composure. I sobbed as I told him Juliet had been choked in our own home and that I didn't know what else to do. I even sent him a photo of the bruises on her neck. No caption, no explanation, just raw, undeniable proof. And I hoped, even if it was foolish, that he'd cry, that he'd rush to us, that he'd hold us and say, "I'm sorry." But no. There was a pause, just a few seconds of silence before he let out a sigh. Then came the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "You two always did exaggerate everything." I went numb. My throat tightened and not a single tear would come. Everything inside me shattered like dust in the wind. Not because he believed Uncle Gary, but because he chose not to believe me. From that moment on, I knew Juliet and I had only each other. No one else, no family, no relatives, no adults coming to fix it all. And I swore I would be the one to do it. Even if it meant facing an entire system. Even if it meant standing against the very man who gave me life. Chapter 5. The truth behind avoidant eyes. After that call with Dad, nothing was the same anymore. Not because I had forgiven him. Not because things got better, but because now I knew. Every lie, every evasion, every silence that clung to our house like mildew suddenly made sense. Dad had dropped the act of being the busy man. He no longer bothered hiding the fact that he slept elsewhere. He showed up randomly, always trailing the scent of a perfume that didn't belong to Mom. And whenever he did come home, he behaved like a guest, throwing out a half-hearted question or two, setting down his rice bowl and scrolling on his phone for the rest of dinner. Mom, on the other hand, kept her frozen face. She never said a word about the affair. No screaming. No accusations. But she started smoking again, something I hadn't seen her do since the day she found out Grandma had died. And then I started noticing the eyes. My teacher looked at Juliet with silent pity, but never asked a thing. The old neighbor would pause outside our yard for just a second, then quickly hurry on if I happened to glance his way. Even Dad's poker buddies, the same ones from that night, avoided me now. As if I were the cause of trouble. That's when it hit me. They knew, maybe not all of them, but enough. Enough adults knew what was happening to Juliet and me, and they chose silence. Because it was easier, because it was none of their business. Because no one wanted to go up against a cop. The fury inside me no longer burned hot. It chilled, numb and sharp like black. So I started writing. A journal. I recorded everything: dates, words, the bruises on Juliet's body, the way Uncle Gary locked our bedroom doors every night. I knew now I couldn't wait around for adults to come save me. I couldn't sit around hoping someone would accidentally discover the truth. I would be the one to blow the whistle. And this time, they wouldn't be able to look away. Chapter 6. When justice needed a child to speak up. I was only 13, the first time I sat across from a child welfare worker's desk. Her office was small, with pale yellow walls, and the mixed scent of old paper and rose perfume made me nauseous. But at least, for the first time, I was sitting without Uncle Gary's eyes burning into me from some shadowed corner. I told her everything. Every slap. Every time Juliet blacked out. Every threat. Every drop of blood that had fallen from my lips onto the kitchen floor. Then I pulled out my journal, the one I had guarded in secret for 3 long months, and placed it on her desk. I wrote everything down, I said. Dates, times, every detail. She didn't say much, just nodded, took notes, sighed, then came more meetings, longer, more formal ones, a therapist, a special police officer, someone not connected to Uncle Gary, a young attorney who smiled at me like I was an adult. I repeated everything like a machine. No more tears. I was emptied out. 1 week later, I watched Uncle Gary being led out of the police station. His face was still stone cold, like nothing could touch that shell of pride, but this time he was in handcuffs. Juliet whispered to me as the footage played on TV, "Do you think we're free now?" I didn't know. Honestly, I didn't. Because even as the prison doors clanged shut behind Uncle Gary, one thing still remained wide open: the silence of those who knew and chose to look away. Not one of them apologized, not Dad, not any of Gary's buddies who once clapped him on the back during poker nights. But you know what? I didn't need them anymore. I had learned something important. If no one speaks up, you have to be the first to scream. And this time, the whole world will hear. Chapter 7, My Father's Return and the Picture on the Wall. 4 years had passed. I was 17 now. Juliet had just turned 12. We were living with a foster family, not perfect, but at least safe. Juliet no longer flinched every time a man entered the room. She'd started drawing again, and me, I wrote essays, blog posts, little reflections, things I never had the chance to say out loud. I thought maybe the nightmare was behind us, until one day I was working a shift at the bookstore near my school when I saw the figure of a man outside the glass window. Wrinkled dress shirt, graying hair. But I knew him instantly. My father. In his arms, he held a picture frame. An old photo, me and Juliet standing beside him at the park. Back when I still believed he'd protect us. I didn't go out. I stood behind the bookshelf watching. He stood there for a few minutes, eyes lost and searching, and then he began to cry. Real tears. And me, I felt nothing but a cold emptiness in my chest. I didn't open the door. I didn't give him the chance to spin another story to blame it all on pressure, helplessness, or being misled, because he had seen the photo of Juliet's bruised neck. And he still chose to look away. When he finally turned and walked off, I stepped outside and watched his figure disappear down the sidewalk. Then I turned back in and went on organizing books. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because I no longer needed him in order to live. And for the first time, I understood family isn't made of blood. It's made of the people who choose to stand beside you when the whole world turns its back. Chapter 8, Juliet. And the me of tomorrow. Juliet is a young woman now. She's no longer the timid little girl she once was. Her eyes shine. Her voice carries strength. And there's a fire in her spirit that commands attention when she walks into a room. I remember one moment vividly from a talk at her new school. Her teacher told me how Juliet had boldly stood up for a classmate who was being bullied. She'd said, "Don't pretend you didn't see anything. Silence helps the bully." When I heard that, I nearly stopped breathing, because I knew then my sister was no longer a victim. We don't talk about Uncle Gary anymore. We don't need to. No one deserves a place in your mind if all they've done is hurt you. As for my father, he never came back. No letter, no call, no explanation. I used to think I needed that for closure, but over time, I realized his silence was his final confession. I don't feel anger anymore, only sadness, sadness for a man who chose not to be a father. And me, I kept writing. Someone once asked me, why do you keep digging up the past? Doesn't it exhaust you? I just smiled. I don't write to cling to the pain. I write so that someone out there, someone being abused, knows this. You are not crazy. You are not weak. And you have every right to scream. Because once upon a time, I wished just one person had spoken up sooner. Maybe Juliet wouldn't have to carry the scars she does. So now, I am that person, and Juliet. She is living proof that we can survive, we can grow, and we can be happy no matter who tried to extinguish our light. If you're still reading this, and if you're still trapped in that same darkness, just remember you are not alone. And one day you'll step out of it too, not trembling, but tall and unshakable. Chapter 9, No Longer a Secret. I never imagined there would come a day when I'd stand on a stage in front of 100 people telling the story that once robbed me of sleep for years. But that day came. At a child protection conference, I stood up, microphone trembling slightly in my hand, and looked out across the rows of seats. Juliet was there, and her eyes no longer held fear. They held pride. I told it all, about Uncle Gary, about my father's silence, about the house that had been a living hell, and about how at 13 I was forced to become the adult no one else would be. Some in the audience cried. Some looked like they couldn't believe a word of it. And then after the talk, a girl, maybe 16, approached me quietly. She said, "You don't know me, but I'm living with a Gary too. And because of you, I know I can get out." I pulled her into a hug, tight. And for the first time, I felt like the wounds of my past had truly started to heal. I realized something that day when a child dares to speak out about what adults choose to ignore. That's not just bravery. That's a slap in the face of the entire system that failed them. Now I keep speaking. I keep writing. I keep standing beside those who were once forced into silence. Because I know what that silence feels like. And because I'm no longer the little girl in the corner holding her breath, listening for the click of the lock. Now I hold the key, and I'll never let anyone else be trapped in their nightmare again. Not if I can help it. Not ever. Chapter 10, When I Became the One to Tell My Own Story. The day I stepped onto my college campus, a light rain was falling. Juliet hugged me from behind, grinning wide. "You're not a victim anymore, you're a survivor." I smiled, not because those words made me feel stronger, but because I knew. Juliet understood now. I'm no longer the 13-year-old girl, quietly wiping blood off the kitchen tiles. No longer the child who had to hear adults say, "Are you sure you're not just imagining it?" No longer the daughter of a man who turned away after seeing his own child's bruised neck. I am myself. And now I tell this story not for pity, but so that other kids will know you can survive. You can grow up. You can become strong. No matter how dark your past was. I tell it to strip away the silence. I tell it to shatter the cycle of fear. I tell it so that those who looked away will have to face the truth. They were wrong. And their silence nearly cost a child her life. Juliet is studying art now. She paints strange, wild pieces bursting with life. She once told me, "We don't have to hide the darkness. We just have to learn how to turn it into color." And I believe her, because we survived. And if you're somewhere out there sitting alone in a locked room, arms around your knees, heart pounding with fear, please remember this. Your story is not a stain. It is proof that you made it through. And one day, maybe you'll tell your story too. Not through tears, but with a clear, steady voice full of pride. Just like I am right now. Chapter 11, an ending doesn't have to be perfect. I used to think that to close a painful chapter, I needed a clear and satisfying ending. I imagined a day when my father would come back, fall to his knees, and beg for forgiveness, or that Gary would stand trial, face a proper sentence, justice, served on paper, clean and absolute. But none of that ever happened. No apology, no courtroom, No legal resolution. The only thing I got was a silence that stretched on and on. And I realized sometimes nothing happens, and that is the ending. It's not the kind of ending that leaves you satisfied, but it's the one I chose not to let define the rest of my life. Juliet still has nightmares sometimes. She still flinches when someone walks too close behind her, and so do I. There are nights I wake up in a cold sweat from the sound of a pan shifting in the kitchen. But the difference now is we have each other. We have friends. We have a home where adults listen. We have days of quiet that aren't broken by screaming. I didn't write this story to offer a movie-perfect ending. I wrote it because I know there are children out there right now still afraid, still waiting for someone to believe them, still waiting for someone to say, "You're not crazy. You're not imagining it. You deserve to be safe." And if no one said that to you yet, let me be the first. There may never be a perfect ending, but there is hope. There is survival. There is a chance to begin again, and sometimes that's all we really need. Chapter 12. If you're still in that dark room, I want to dedicate this final chapter to you. Not the future you, not the version who has already made it out, but you right now. You, the one quietly holding your phone in the dark, heart pounding at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. You, the one wondering, is it my fault? Am I being too sensitive? If I speak up, will anyone even believe me? I was you once. I know what it feels like to sit in that pitch black room, holding your breath so still that even you can't hear it. To wake up in the middle of the night with dried tears on your face because the nightmare felt too much like real life. To look your own family in the eyes, clinging to a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they'll finally get it. But they don't. Or worse, they choose not to. So let me say this to you right here and now. It's not your fault. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you're imagining things. And it's definitely not because you weren't good enough. You were hurt because someone chose to do the wrong thing. And you deserve to live in a world where that truth isn't buried under labels like family privacy or don't make a scene. You are not alone. I'm proof. Juliet is proof. And there are thousands of others slowly stepping out of the shadows, one shaky step at a time, but with unstoppable determination. If you're not ready to leave yet, that's okay. If you still have to fake a smile every day, that's okay too. Just know this one day you will get out. And on that day, you'll never have to stay silent again. Because your story deserves to be told. Because you deserve to live a full life without fear, without shame, and without apologizing for what wasn't your fault. And if no one's ever said this to you before, let me be the first. I believe you. I stand with you, and you deserve to be safe, to be heard, to be loved. Even if the world is still pretending not to see, I see you, and one day you will write your ending, not with trembling hands, but with a voice that's clear, steady, and proud. If you've listened all the way to the end, thank you. Because silence only has power when no one dares to break it, and sometimes just one person willing to listen is enough to change everything. If you know someone who's living in fear or has gone through something similar, please share this story with them, not to shock them, but to remind them they are not alone. And if you're drawn to real stories, raw, emotional, and unafraid to confront the truth, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next true Reddit stories. See you in the next video where voices once buried in silence now rise louder than ever.